Okay, we're continuing with this book here, The Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, Pete Rogers, going in alphabetical order. Here's Paul Goodman. He lived from 1911 1972. He said, "Nowadays, few great men could pass personnel." I could never get past personnel. Devout Catholic, Puerto Rican, outspoken, believes in freedom and free speech. Good teaching is what leads the student to want to learn more. Okay, that's good. He used to have another quote that it's very difficult for boys to become men nowadays because the establishment does not want them to become men. Because real men who think independently are kind of unsafe. They have their own opinions. They're not puppets. They're not stupid, controllable type of creatures. Okay, here's a quote by Alison Gopnik. She says, "What teenagers want most of all are social rewards, especially the respect of their peers." It's actually a dangerous thing about teenagers is they're much more interested in what their friends think and getting along with their friends than in what their parents think. And I'll just tell you, it was one of the sad moments in my life was my wife and I had an argument about whether or not to buy my daughter a cell phone. At that time, my daughter was the smartest of all my kids. She used to love to read books and she would talk to me. And so my wife's like, "Oh, I have to buy her a phone. How else is she going to call me when she needs a ride home?" I said she could use her friend's home, for her friend's phone or the school phone, okay? My wife's like, "Oh, you're a crazy autistic jerk. Kid needs to have a phone. I'm buying her a phone so she can call me." And the problem in a family is, the man should be running the family, but the man doesn't have time. The man's working late hours. People say, "Oh, you're both doctors." I worked much longer hours than my wife. I made about 5 times as much money, okay? But I was not home that much, okay? And I don't have that emotional energy like a wife has. So basically, I would get overruled on all these little family decisions. She buys my daughter a phone. My daughter never once ever read another book again that she would discuss with me. Not once, ever. All they want to do once they get that cell phone is communicate with their friends, okay? And Ayn Rand wrote a book called Return of the Primitive, and she talked about what a terrible idea it is to have a bunch of children together of the same age. And it's also bad to mix some boys with girls. It is much better, the Catholic idea of keeping boys and girls separate until they get older. Let them mix together when they're in college, okay? They distract each other. But anyways, when they're all the same age, they're all equally ignorant, and all they care about is social stuff. They no longer care about learning. When a child is with an older person, then they learn. So anyways, it's bad to have them together. It makes them stupid. Okay, Timothy Gordon, he's a Catholic writer. He said, "America is wired Catholic, labeled Protestant, and currently functioning secular." Yeah, secular America is a disaster. All of our institutions are crumbling and becoming third world crap holes, turning against the people. The founders were almost entirely Protestant. The Catholic Church reasons with Aristotle. Yeah, Aristotle is what led to the Italian Renaissance. You can basically think of Catholicism as coming out of the Old Testament and coming out of the ancient Greeks, okay? And then the Aristotelian side of reasoning primarily goes through the Catholic side of it. And the Catholic side is much better. It's much more fun. It has much more sense of life. Protestantism is kind of backwards and stupid, and it says it just goes by the Bible. But the reality is, people are sick of always hearing this pie in the sky. They want to live while they're on earth, okay? And they want to have a good life and a good community. And Catholicism is 1,000 times better for that. It has a much greater sense of beauty, art, nature, music, etc. So the Aristotle side goes through Catholicism. The St. Augustine, the Plato to St. Augustine to Luther, Bible only goes through Protestantism. And the Catholic Church was around for hundreds and hundreds of years before the Bible, okay? There's a lot of stuff to religion besides that. And then, more things that happen. We're not going to get into all that right now. Okay, Aquinas viewed the family as a primary unit of society. And the family should be the primary unit of society. That's what creates a good future generation is intact families. Children need to be raised by their fathers. Mommy's most important up until they hit puberty. After they hit puberty, fathers are more important than mothers most of the time for most things. There's, of course, exceptions to that, but they need that unconditional love, especially when they're young. As they get older, they need that objective perspective of the father. Okay. The late Middle Ages is the most overly slandered time in all of history. Tons of intellectual, scientific achievements happened in the Middle Ages. Why was it that the Italian Renaissance happened in Europe? Because the Western Christendom was so far ahead of all the rest of the world. The rest of the world is a bunch of backward tyrants, collectivism, okay, no freedom, property was not secure, so nobody wants to invent anything because it just gets taken away from you. Okay, he says the people of the Middle Ages were much more academic than we are today in terms of the scholars. Thomas Aquinas studied 16 hours a day. Thomas Aquinas was sort of the unifier of faith and reason. To the founding fathers, America was a moral country, and pursuit of happiness meant pursuit of the good. That also kind of comes out of Socrates. It meant liberty to pursue the good. Nowadays, America is an immoral country, and people think that pursuit of happiness just meant pursuit of immoral pleasures. Okay, Catholic teaching. And by the way, when Thomas Jefferson said separation of church and state, that sort of topic, what he was talking about was not being forced to be an Anglican. They expected everybody to be Christian. Okay, Catholic teaching in the famous Rerum Novarum by Pope Leo tracks Thomas Aquinas' quote very closely. Private ownership, as we have seen, is a natural right of man, and to exercise that right, especially as members of society, is not only lawful but absolutely necessary. Yeah, once you go down the path that man is created out of the image of God and all people are equal in the eyes of God, then it's natural that you respect individual rights. And like Ayn Rand said, if you respect individual rights, everything else will follow in terms of rights for people. Okay, Gorgias, one of the ancient Greek philosophers who Socrates and Plato thought was a sophist, he said, persuasion is the chief end of rhetoric. And I think rhetoric is a good thing. I mean, if you're going to talk, why not learn how to talk effectively? Be articulate. Okay, Maxim Gorky, the higher goal a person pursues, the quicker his ability develops and the more beneficial he will become to society. That's also one of the reasons why Christians are so superior in terms of cultural achievement to all the other cultures on the planet, because the Christian wants to please God, and they'll say, what is most pleasing to God? What could be the best thing that I could do in the eyes of God? So when they do a work of art, it's not, they have that extra sense of motivation to try to do something pleasing to God. And you see that throughout cultural history. Look at Bach, everything he did, he said, to the greater glory of God. He signed all his compositions. And what did Michelangelo say? I do everything out of my, for the glory of God, to honor God. That's where it comes from. That's why Christianity produces the best achievers in all the different fields. Okay, Glenn Gould. Glenn Gould's intensity appealed to his audiences. Glenn Gould's name was linked to Bach, and it's good to be linked to Bach. Glenn Gould was considered by many to be the greatest pianist in the world. Glenn Gould felt more creative when he was alone. He eventually wanted to become a writer. He enjoyed writing. I saw him, he was a magnificent pianist. I'll put a link in the description below to Glenn Gould playing piano, some of his early musical moments. Here's a quote by Gould. Music is the building of sound, and Bach is the greatest architect of all time. Okay, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed those.